This is a presentation about a survey of locums working in the North East, which I carried out in 2016, and they were contacted via the North East Sessional GP group. By and large, the response rate was approximately 25%. So the first question is here: do you agree written terms and conditions of work with practices in advance, in addition to the fee? So for example, do you outline workload, cancellation terms, superannuation, etc.? And over half of locums did agree written terms, either often or nearly always, and just under half didn't agree them. Locums were asked to describe their experience of agreeing terms of engagement, and it varied a fair bit, with some locums finding it easy and others finding it much harder. In particular, they struggled to feel in control of additional unexpected work, and practice managers varied in how much they welcomed written terms, some of them welcoming it as a sign of professionalism, others being more negative. The other theme was that when locums are unhappy, they tend to just leave rather than discuss the problems, and if they feel unsafe, they will leave at short notice. The next point was that agencies remove the need to negotiate, and that clarity is appreciated by locums even when not necessarily defined by them. And finally, locums tend to avoid these difficult conversations by sticking to practices that they know, and they have used the NESG booking templates as one way to put things in writing. And here's what locums have said about their experience of negotiating terms. I feel unhappy to return to practices that don't have insight into the difficulties locum doctors face and why they have to set terms and fees. Negotiating workload is generally easier, but extra urgent work on the day, etc., and some fluid requests can be difficult. Also, last-minute cancellation can be difficult to deal with. I like smiling, friendly staff, organised locum folder, well-stocked room, and it's nice to have a glimpse of one of the partners so you know who you're working for. Locums were asked to state how many patients they tend to see per surgery, and then also how many they'd like to see. And this graph shows that on average they see 15.5 patients per surgery. On average they'd like to see 13.3 as an average. Locums were asked to say whether they sign repeat prescriptions, firstly when working in short-term locums, and you can see here that over half don't sign repeat prescriptions in these circumstances. So the never, which is 21%, plus the rarely, 38%, equates to 59% not signing repeat prescriptions. We then asked the same question about locums working in long-term placements, and here there was still quite a high percentage that rarely signed prescriptions, so 32%, but more than half would tend to either often or usually sign repeat prescriptions. Locums were asked to describe their experiences of being asked to sign repeat prescriptions and also of negotiating a suitable time and boundaries for this work. And their responses indicated that there were variations in their willingness to sign, with their willingness being increased if there were no visits and if they were doing longer term work in one particular practice where they could get to know the systems. They would be less willing to sign if this was in short-term or ad hoc placements where they didn't know the systems, and also for problematic prescriptions like DMARDs, controlled drugs, sedatives, and also if the requests were outside of the review period and there had been no monitoring. The responses that locums gave regarding prescriptions were interesting. Here's a small selection. Don't like to be asked by nurse or receptionist to just sign this. I state in my confirmation email that I don't do nurse or repeat prescribing. Not safe. I don't know most of their patients or the thoroughness of their med reviews. I will agree to sign on occasions, provided medication reviews are in date, items on scripts are in line with prescribing guidance and are straightforward. I won't sign, for example, non-steroidal anti-inflammatories or night sedation on repeat. Looking through the scripts, I discovered widespread out-of-guidance prescribing, poor follow-up of chronic disease, unusual prescribing, and other concerns and mistakes too significant and serious to be just ignored, and I spent considerable unpaid time and effort trying to get the practice to address this with very limited success. In the end, I was left no choice but to resign to protect myself and raise the issue through appropriate channels to protect patients. Locums were asked whether they normally received an acknowledgement or receipt for their superannuation payment. Over half of them said that they normally did, with 14% saying occasionally, and 15% said they rarely did. They were also asked if they had any experience of practices refusing to pay the employer's part of locum superannuation, and the majority hadn't, but there was a 5% response rate for those who had had these difficulties. Locums were asked to indicate how they obtained their work, and there was some interesting data here. In particular, the two commonest ways to obtain work were direct approaches from practices, 85%, and email alerts from North East Sessional GP Group, 66%. But agencies had a significant usage among locums, with 31% saying they'd obtained work through agencies. The other growing group is web-based platforms, with 12%. We were interested to find out the working patterns of locums, so we asked locums to think about the practice that they'd worked in the last month and how long they'd been working there for. So 34% had been working at that practice for less than 3 months, whereas 25% had been working at the practice for between 3 and 6 months, and 41% had been working at their current practice for more than 6 months. In terms of the distribution across CCGs, if we look at a 1-month period, locums tended to work across up to 3 CCGs, but mainly between 1 and 2, whereas over a period of 3 months, they tended to have worked anywhere between 1 and 4 CCGs, with most working at around 2 CCGs. And over a period of 12 months, they could be working in up to 6 CCG areas, but with most of them working in a smaller number of them. This slide shows the distribution of respondents by area. In this question, locums were asked to explain how they chose the practices in which they worked, and to rate a number of factors from 1 to 10. So, looking at the ones that had the most importance, and they'll be listed in order of most importance, practice respecting the workload you've agreed to do was the most important factor, followed by support by doctors and clinical staff. Then there was the rate of pay for the locum work, being invited to educational meetings, and a low likelihood of carrying out visits. Then prompt payment of locum work and signature of superannuation forms, bookings being cancelled at short notice, providing a consulting room which is well stocked and tidy, being familiar with a computer system, support by receptionists, secretaries and admin, and having a suitable induction information for the locum, and finally distance from home. There were, however, other factors that influenced the locum's choice of practice that were not on this predefined tick list, and these were presented in the free text answers. And these were the following: familiarity, patients being perceived as friendly or not, overly demanding, whether on-call was required, whether there were referral management systems which might take extra time to navigate through, and whether the locum had to dictate or write their own letters without the assistance of a dictation equipment and software. Respondents were also asked to explain what factors influenced their decision to work as a locum, and in order of the most importance, first of all, was having more control over workload in a given day and the intensity of the work. The possibility of developing other roles came next. The fact that the income was perceived as being better than alternatives, there not being any salaried or partnership roles which appealed, greater flexibility for holidays, caring responsibilities was next in order of priorities, being more flexible about the number of hours which they worked, not having practice management duties, and finally, and of lowest priority, was difficulties securing their preferred post. Regarding experiences of trying to access time-out events, most respondents felt uninformed apart from any SG emails, and there were quite a few barriers to attending, mainly not finding out what the events were, having to book via practice and the practice manager being hard to get hold of, having to prove that you've worked in a specific practice, as well as already being booked ahead and not wanting to cancel work or lose income by attending. And here are some quotes. "Not allowed unless a practice manager where I recently worked signs the forms, etc. And the practice managers are not always happy or hard to get hold of, so I've given up trying to attend CCG events now altogether, as I work part-time and in different practices, so there are often no practices where I've done more than a couple of days." So what could CCGs do to support you as a locum? Well, better access to timeouts under compulsory training, access to newsletters and updates on services, pathways, and access to GP TeamNet, and providing better access to occupational health. So when asked to provide some comments about their experience of what CCGs could do, here was one of the quotes. "Allow attendance at CCG timeout without the need for getting a practice manager to sign a form, as we as locums can provide evidence of working in their CCG region in other forms such as invoices, locum agreements, emails confirming placement at a certain practice, or someone, admin secretary, practice manager, can simply email event organiser confirming we worked on such a date rather than having to complete a form. Allow more representation of sessionals on CCGs." Regarding trying to obtain or retain an NHS Net email account, locums describe getting locked out due to not using these accounts and then not being able to log back in unless based at a practice. The email address had to be arranged by request from a practice, and also if you're working for a CCG or as an appraiser, you had better ways to secure an NHS Net email address. Locums were asked what LMCs might do to support them, and they came up with a number of requests which are listed here. Indemnity was a big one, as was sorting out pensions. They were also worried about their sickness insurance and access to letters and newsletters and information and mandatory training. They also wanted LMCs to support them in terms of guiding practice about terms of engagement, and also improving locum induction experiences at practice level. Here are some quotes about what the LMC could do to support locums. Guidance to practices about how to treat locums and minimum basic acceptable terms. Not sure what support LMC provides. Include me in newsletters, and ensure that all information regarding learning events, medical and clinical issues and political issues are cascaded to sessional GPs. Works sometimes, but gaps in some of the information we receive. Here's what respondents said NESG could do to support locums. NESG has always provided a brilliant support and networking base ever since I completed my training 4 years ago. It's a huge credit for doctors who found it. I would not change a thing. Encourage more onto LMC so we have a voice. I think NESG are fantastic and wouldn't work as a locum without them. Regarding experiences of working in out-of-hours services, respondents said they found this isolating and unsupported for many. The service focused on efficiency and throughput with unsupportive culture and management. Indemnity was a barrier for many due to the cost, or also because of the concerns that the indemnity provided by the out-of-hours provider might not be adequate. Here's what they said about their experience of out-of-hours work. I no longer work for them as I do not trust their indemnity cover, and I don't do enough sessions to justify the payment. Overall, I find the work fairly boring. Most of the phone work could be done by nurse practitioners. X is a business and targets are prioritised over patient care. I'm likely to stop doing sessions as I am now not properly indemnified with their new insurance. This slide shows the average age of respondents, which was 46, and also the average number of years since qualifying as a GP, which was 15. This slide shows the distribution by gender amongst respondents, and then the distribution of respondents according to the type of work that they do, with the categories not being mutually exclusive. So thank you for listening and watching this. You may find the NESG 2015 survey of interest also, and it's available on the NESG website. If you found this talk interesting, please consider liking, sharing and subscribing to my YouTube channel to hear of further projects and videos.